Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is the extended version of today's live show, episode 21 from season 2. My very special guest today is Gina Worful, and she is a registered dietitian and founder of the Mastering Mindfulness Institute. If you missed the live show, you missed so much goodness because the show we covered actually how to master your mindfulness in 3 steps and what that means for your nervous system and what it means for diet and releasing weight and just being overall more healthy. And one of the things we love to do on the extended version is dive into our actual guest today and find out also what makes them tick. So, Gina, all of us had a superpower when we were a kid, but we didn't know it was a superpower until we got a little bit older. So I'm so curious, what is your superpower?
Yeah, that actually really came to my awareness as an adult because as a kid, I was had this very sensitive part of me that was very soft, very sensitive. I got hurt very easily. I just wanted everybody to be liked and loved. As I grew up and I learned about entrepreneurship, I was introduced to the world of entrepreneurship. I saw it as people who are leaders and they're tough and they're mentally strong. And I thought, I'm going to fail at this if I am too sweet and soft. And so I tried so hard to block out that part of me. I thought it was my weakness.
Wow.
And I was trying so hard to overcome it and overcome it. And my sister said to me one day, I had these students in a program, and my sister said, why don't you ask your students why they come to you and why they stay with you? And when I asked them that, every single student said the same thing. They said, they said something along the lines of, you have this very soft heart that I feel safe with you and I don't feel judged and I feel seen. And you're like this there's like this nurturing part of you. And I realized that this sensitive part that I thought was my weakness was actually my superpower. And they said that to me, I have really leaned into it. I am like full heart softness, and I have really leaned into that as being my superpower, and it feels so good.
Yes, yes, and yes. It's so interesting when you think about think about a superhero. Like, let's just take Superman, right? Superman is this conflicted super. I want everyone to realize superheroes are not immune to trauma because all of them have one. If you really dig deep, they all have one. You actually don't have to dig that deep. It's usually part of the plot. But one of the things that I think people realize is that it doesn't have to be kind of that militant rah in order to be a gift to people in the world. I know that for myself, when I think about things like even like workout programs or coaching programs, I'm actually not a big fan of kind of the military, like strict yelling, like overly masculine version of anything. So that just doesn't resonate with me at all. And so I can definitely see where, it is a gift. It is a gift to have that softness and to also come and put people in that safe space. Cause that's, I think, where we all want to be, right? We want to be in a place where we can feel seen and heard and feel like we are free to just speak our truth and let that come out around people that support us and are not going to be judging it or, asking us to do 30 push-ups because it wasn't the answer that they wanted.
Yeah, totally.
So Gina, talk to me about some of the other great advice that you've gotten in life. Give us one on finances, for example. Is there a nugget? Is there a piece of gold that you hold when it comes to something that you've learned about finances that you wish you knew when you were younger?
I think that just something that has really always stuck with me is that something that my mom taught me, that she was like, as much as you can, start earlier. And it's okay if you take what you can and just put it into something that will grow. Like for me, it was my Roth. And I I don't know if I should give this advice. I really don't know if I should be giving this kind of financial advice, but so far it's working out well. It was advised to me to get rid of my mutual fund and move it out all over to Berkshire Hathaway stocks, and that's what I'm doing. It's going
Wow.
really well. However, I don't know if I feel competent to give any financial advice, except that I was really grateful that the advice that my mom gave me when I was younger was like, I know when you're young and you're like in your 20s or in your 30s, you're like holding on to like every dollar that you got. But she's like, take some of those dollars that you got and like put it away. It'll be in the back of your mind. Put
Yeah.
it on your account that's on automatic withdraw. And that's just been just the most valuable thing for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely sound advice. It's the advice our parents, I think, are great at sometimes giving us sort of the basics of like, hey,
Yeah.
save. But if we actually implement, it's so crazy how like saving and investing, all those, letting your money grow for you instead of having to figure out how to make, show up with a lot of money. It's like, hey, let your money actually go to work in the background, and it's,
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah, thank you for that. And let's go, back to like the health and wellness of our mind, because that's such a big piece of it. But I'm also like a fan of biohacking. I'm a fan of, the taking a little risk here and there. I'm definitely a fan of just trying all the things. And I know that there are some things you've tried as well. What would you say is one of your like go-to, kind of external things that you enjoy? Like, is it, a sauna? Is it some sort of like vitamin you swear by? Like, what other little health hack do you have for us today?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I love all of those things. I love the sauna. I love the cold plunge. I'm a big fan of supplements when they match your labs. I think
Mm,
instead of like doing something generic, when you don't know your labs, you're kind of just like blindly shooting a target and just saying, let's just see how this goes. But
yeah.
what's so cool is when you take supplements like and then pair it with your labs, you can watch your labs go up and down and up and down. And it's like, whoa, I think that that's one of the really the coolest things. Um, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that would be more specific than that.
I actually like what you're saying about labs. I'm a person who gets labs regularly. I do the hair mineral test. I also do blood. And
Cool.
I definitely like to see the correlation between things. I love to see what am I doing differently, that's either contributing to the numbers being great or contributing to like a decline in some of my numbers. And it was on my very last set of blood work. I remember I was like, oh, what is happening right now? And I was realizing that it was because I was having acai bowls like every day. Yeah. I'm like, oh, healthy, right? So full of
Yeah,
fruit. And I was
right.
getting the extra protein scoop. So in my mind, I was definitely making a healthy choice, but my labs showed me otherwise. It was
Labs
still
don't
just,
lie.
yeah, labs don't lie. And it was definitely showing me that there was still some sugar load that was happening that my body was not really a fan of. And so it was like, all right, note to self, got to scale down on the acai bowls. Now it's like, once every couple of weeks. But it was
Yeah.
also an interesting shift to go, oh, my bad.
Yeah. I mean, I love labs because labs don't lie. You just get that real data to see, to have an honest look at like, is what I'm doing working? And then you can be a lot more precise with what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. And, one of the areas that definitely the listeners love to hear about are relationships. So, talk to us about your biggest lessons in relationships. What is, if you had to go back in time and or even just looking now, right? You can reflect on the past and say, like, what are some of your biggest lessons in relationships? What can we all do better, show up as better? What can we all glean from anything that you've learned?
Yeah, something I really learned came in very strong for me from my last relationship, my last partner. And something that we decided early on was that the purpose of our relationship was to be mirrors for each other's growth. And so
Mm,
that comes with every time that we had a trigger show up. That means if I have something show up for me, that means that there's probably something deeply unhealed from my past or something in my heart. And so that was really the guidance that, like, when I could see my partner was in a trigger, it's like, okay, there's something really deep that he's dealing with right now that's probably beyond even just what's happening inside of our relationship. And for
Hmm.
me, when it would come up, he, with that knowing, like he could hold the space for me of like, okay, she's exploring something really, really deep right now. And that allowed us to, our triggers being a mirror in our relationship and viewing them as that instead of like, this is just an everyday problem. It really allowed us to have so much depth and self exploration and so much healing inside of the container of that relationship.
That's so beautiful. That's really beautiful. How would you say, I love what you said about that you all decided that you were going to be mirrors for each other, because I don't know that everyone shows up in relationships quite that intentional, right? I think
Mm,
sometimes like you meet someone and you think, oh, I think they're someone I could spend my life with. And we have some values or some things in common. So what helps frame the conversation? Like, how do you even have that conversation when
yeah.
you're with a person who is a potential partner, or that you're making this decision with? Like, how does that even show up?
I think that we got lucky that we had met at a retreat where our personal triggers were naturally showing up. And that's kind of how we bonded. And that gave us compassion for each other because we naturally met in that type of setting. And then we realized, wow, we're going to reveal things in each other of old wounds. And I think that if we would have tried to hit the gold standard for a relationship of like fight as least as possible or trigger each other as least as possible, right? You like want to put on a good face when you're early on in a relationship. But when we tried to do that, we actually missed a lot of richness that came from the relationship and the depth that was, it's okay if you get triggered. Let's discover what that means and how I might be a part of older healing for you. And so I think for us, it just kind of naturally happened because we met in that type of situation. But what I've decided for myself is that in any relationship, I want to bring that into the next relationship of like, you might be a mirror for my unhealed parts. I might be a mirror for your unhealed parts. Let's try to hold compassion and allow
Mm.
them and see like what can we help each other really heal together.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I think that's really golden, and it's worth having the conversation. So oftentimes, I work with women who I call it silent suffering, because their partner is a mirror for them in many ways, and as they're feeling that, they're holding it in. They're holding tight to what it is versus what it can be, and like not understanding that the freedom is in actually the expression of and the sharing of, and also having someone who can also reflect some things back to you or share their experience of you in that moment. And I think
Yeah.
that part is really, really important, and people miss that. One of the things that came up this week is I was getting a share, and as she was sharing, she was saying how, she's having all these feelings come up around like moving. Her husband had, been given an offer that's like, across the country. She was like, I'm not feeling it. And this is just really bringing up a lot for me. And then the transition was, oh, but we had a conversation, and I told him how I felt, even though it was scary, even though it was hard. And it come to find out he's having just the same feelings, and actually wasn't feeling great about moving across the country, but just felt like it was like his
Mm,
obligation, because, he needs to get work again. And it was interesting to like go, oh, how much freedom came for both of them by,
yeah.
instead of holding on to the conflict and saying, oh, well, they want to go, I want to stay. This are we on the path to something that's not going to work here? Instead of just being brutally honest and saying, this doesn't feel great for me, are we going to be able to figure this out? To have your partner also show up and go, oh, wow, I'm actually relieved to hear you say that, because it doesn't feel good for me either. I just felt like I
Mm-hmm.
needed to do it. So there was so much clarity and truth and freedom in just being able to have the conversation with each other. And that's the one thing that so many people just don't have the confidence, or they're in the codependency enough that they're like, if I say anything, this relationship might end, and oh, I don't want to be there. But what happens when we fully step in and then know that, like, when we're in that right relationship with the right person, then that's our opportunity to like sit together in some of our some of our shit, sit together in
Yeah.
some of those moments and also go, well, no, we're still on the same team. Like we're choosing to stay together, or maybe not. And so
Yeah.
just knowing that like we can be in that right relationship, and mostly being that relationship with ourselves, right? Of just being able to
Mhm.
just harness like our own truth and share it and meet someone along the line that what we know we can share that truth with and that will be honest with us. Like what a
Yeah.
beautiful gift that is. I love that.
Something we had learned, this one came from Kim and Ami, that we had learned that became an extremely helpful tip that we learned early on, was that every relationship you have, whether it's between you and me and my partner, me and my friend, we all start our relationship with this window in between us. And every time we're not completely honest or we don't share how we feel, and that builds resentment, it's like you're putting dirt on the window and you're
Mm,
dirtying up the glass. And if you keep doing it and you're not honest because you're people pleasing or you're codependent or for whatever reason, you're adding to that window. And then over time, you can't even see your partner anymore. And then you can't even see your own reflection. And you've just completely dirtied up that glass. And
mm,
that was like such a strong piece of wisdom that we were pretty committed to, like, we need to be authentic and honest from the beginning and not
mm.
dirty up this window and lose each
Yes.
other and lose ourselves in it.
Yes. Yes, and yes, and yes. I love that. I love that so much. Yeah. And I hope for anyone that's listening today that you're really hearing what Gina's saying and that you're hearing what I'm saying, because I know that it can feel anxious and it can feel hard to have some of these conversations, especially when we are projecting or looking into our own crystal ball and saying, oh, I think they're going to respond this way, or they're not going to respond a way that we want them to. And instead of forcing the outcome that we want or ignoring what's actually going on, being able to lean in and just be so honest, it brings you to a whole nother place where you honor yourself. Actually, you honor yourself by being truthful. And I think that is the real gift of that whole phrase, that the truth will set you free, in so many ways. And it's just that being aligned and knowing that whatever happens next, it can always be for your greatest and highest good.
Mhm.
And I think that that's the gift. So thank you for sharing that tidbit.
Yeah.
What would you say is something that has is there a piece of advice or a word or a book, a podcast, any of those things that has shown up in your life that is giving you a really big paradigm shift? Like, what have been some of those things along the way? That big kind of that person that, or that thing that was the domino that like led to all this other like lusciousness in your life.
Uh, the thing that just came up for me was a book that really rocked my world, which was The Presence Process. Have you heard of that
I
one?
have not.
That was probably the most impactful book for me, but I think I needed it the most at the time. And I think that's when I was really at the peak of like not really understanding why I was like struggling with my food cravings and why I was like self sabotaging and why I had all this internal like angst and I just couldn't like find happiness. Like I couldn't figure out how I couldn't cross the bridge to happiness. And I was trying. In the presence process, taught me about how unfelt emotions get built up in the body. And by doing rigid diets and exercise programs, all you're doing is wasting time with distraction. And what you're really missing out on is really coming into your body and being with the unfelt emotion and the emotional charge that's in your body that's causing you to want to cope with the feeling that's inside of your body. And it really taught me how to start not being afraid, because I was the person who was like, I can't meditate. Well, I can't
Mm.
meditate because I was so uncomfortable sitting with myself.
Got it.
That was the first thing that gave me the courage to finally start sitting and being like, okay, what is this discomfort that's inside of my body that I'm running from,
Right.
and starting to feel what was in there. That was a big pivotal shift for me.
Oh, that's a juicy little shift, because it's actually not a little shift. It's actually a pretty big one.
It was
And I,
monumental. He
yes.
says like the first page of the book, this book was written for you, and he was just called me out. I was like, oh my gosh, yes. I'm avoiding everything inside of me and wondering why nothing is ever changing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the ability to sit and be with ourselves is a gift. And I think that it does take time. There's something to be said for that. It's the acceptance of like, and the realization earlier on. For those of you who are younger, I hope you'll catch this earlier and not wait till you're 90 to learn this lesson. But it's that ability to sit with ourselves and to also sit sometimes with discomfort. We're such a society that is chasing a lot of pleasure, and I'm not saying don't chase pleasure. And what I'm saying is sometimes discomfort does show up and a challenge shows up, and we do need to sit with it. We do need to sit with things that happen and process instead of bypass. And that process is, I believe, where so much of the clearing happens. Otherwise, we just stuff it down, and eventually it shows up in some other way, down the line. So it's a gift. It's definitely a gift. I love that. Um, Anything else that you have coming up, Miss Gina? Any events, any launches, anything like that? Anything that we can share with our guests? Because I know people are already like, wow, how do I work with Gina?
Well, I always share as much as I can, just a lot of free resources on Instagram and podcasting, the Mastering Mindfulness Institute. And I do a lot of teachings there. And I'll be teaching a Conquering Cravings course in the fall.
Oh,
Working on that right now. I've been doing that for a few years, so that'll be in the fall. But yeah, I like to give away lots of free teachings and stuff on Instagram and YouTube and put the
yes.
podcast.
Yes, if you all haven't followed Gina, she's a lot of fun, and she's just authentically herself, and it's my favorite thing to watch people human that way. So just
Oh,
saying.
thanks, Mary.
You're so welcome. Well, Gina, thank you for being our guest today and for sharing your other spokes of wisdom in the other areas of life. And it was just a pleasure to have you on. And looking forward to sharing the content. For those of you who are watching or listening, please do like it, share it, give it to someone you love. Take this wisdom and teach it to somebody else. That's how you know you've really learned. And with that, we will see you again next week. Thank you, Gina, again for being our guest, and we'll see you all later.